All right. We still skip the idea of histograms. And the idea of a histogram is, excuse me, you create an array that doesn't contain the data itself. It contains a count of the data. And so I'm just going to pop open a notepad and give you a quick explanation. We're not going to go ahead. We're not going to write it. Suppose you have the user typing in their favorite color. While true, just do this infinitely. So you get their favorite color. S is equal to scanner dot next. And then we do something like this. If S dot equals red, we increment the number of reds, right? Else if S dot equals blue, then we increment the number of blues. And then else if S dot equals green. That's one way to do it. And then we could print out a little chart showing the reds, the blues, and the greens. Or you could do it like this. I'm going to copy that text and then I'm going to paste it. We could declare a histogram array. You know, every other language in the earth wants the parentheses to follow the variable name.
I don't mind doing it after the variable name.
Just know that in this language you can do it either way. So, and then in my exams I have it the other way, so I probably ought to switch between the two occasionally. So anyways, I'm going to call this the color histogram. Just color his. And we only have 3 colors. And then we are going to say that, let's bump this up to 4. That if color his element equals 1, I'm going to put 2 equals there even though this isn't row code, they chose red. If the element equals 2, they chose blue. And if the color equals 3, that means they chose green. Now we have a single data element that represents the entire history of what they typed, rather than 3 different variables. And is one variable better than 3? Not really, but is one variable better than 75? Yeah. So this represents their choices. And so we would write it where if S dot equals red, then we increment the color history array at element 1, like that. And if color history equals blue, then we increment. And you can make this a little bit more elegant if you wanted to.
In Java, are the arrays filled with null values or zeros when it's initialized?
So in Java, are they filled with zeros or nulls? Well, nulls are zeros. But if it's a primitive value, if it's an array of primitives, it's all zeros. If it's an array of references, it's all nulls.
Okay.
So then when we were done, we could print out our array history, our histogram. So we could do system.out.println reds chosen, equals plus, I'm going to shorten that so that it all fits on one screen, color his parentheses 1, like that.
You're a lot better explaining it than me trying to read the PowerPoint on your walls.
Yeah, the PowerPoint was a little bit confusing. And then the number of blues was equal to color history 2. And then the number of greens was equal to color history 3. And 0 would just mean that they chose something completely wrong or whatever. How could we improve this? There's a couple ways we can improve this. One is instead of saying 1, 2, and 3, we could use constants for this, or an enum to specify, constant int red equals 1, constant int blue equals 2, constant int green equals 3. And so we could change this to red, right there, and blue and green. That's one way you could do it. Another is you could have a parallel array of the color names. So I'm going to delete that. I wonder how many undos I can do. No. So, string colors is equal to, and I'm going to leave the first one blank. Why? Because we decided that 0 means that they didn't choose anything. And then red, blue, green. And then this would look a little bit different. Once we find a match in the colors array, the index number is just the same index number we would increment, right? Red is the first element here, so if we found a match for red, then we would increment 1. If we found a match for blue, we would increment 2. If we found a match for green, we would increment 3. So we could search this array, find its position, and if it existed, then we would increment that value in the histogram array. But that's essentially what a histogram is. You're just keeping track of the occurrences, not the data itself, in an array. And books and whatever usually show this with numeric values, but I find it easier if you do that. You could do the same thing for like die rolls, generate a random number between 1 and 6, and you could count the number of times they roll a 6 as opposed to a 5, as opposed to a 4. And you could try to determine if the die was, weighted so that it wouldn't roll a 1 or something like that based on its history.
What would be the quickest way to check that, though? Because you wouldn't want to do like an if statement for every number, would you? Or
Yeah, okay, so if we're going to do a histogram of die rolls, it would look something like this. D1 is equal to a random number between 1 and 6. We'd have to declare our histogram. So, integram, dice history. I'm going to actually declare it 7 because I want to leave 0 out. Like that. And then while true, we're talking about this so much, I ought to make y'all do it as an assignment. Anyways, so, and then dice history at that position gets incremented like that. So you don't need to write a big old if statement for that. If it's purely numbers, you could do that. And so why did I leave the first element out? Because I wanted my numbers between 1 and 6. And so in order to get the values 1 through 6 supported, in order to support a 6 there, I had to do a 7.
right, okay.
And if you were doing something else, like generating a Pathfinder character, you'd do something like D is equal to however you're going to generate the number between 3 and 18. So what are our array values? How would we declare our arrays in this case?
One that has 21,
I would just make it 19.
19?
The reason I would make it 19 is so that we could go all the way up to 18, and we would just agree that by convention 0, 1, and 2 are unused.
Right,
And that's okay. Some people think I have to optimize this and stuff like that. No, the ease of programming is more important than optimizing it to save 3 bytes in this case. And yeah, you could subtract 3, from it so that if the number was an 18, we incremented the 15th spot in the array, but that makes it way harder to think about. So that's a histogram. I'm not going to even go to the PowerPoints on that. You can read the PowerPoints if you care. So an array of objects. I think we kind of talked about that. let's go ahead and make, how much did we talk about this?
An array of objects, I just remember it from other classes, so I mean, I figure it's the same, so.
So Kathleen, did we do arrays of objects in here?
Yeah, what did we do? We did arrays continue, but we did last week.
So we're going to do arrays of objects. What is an array of objects? Well, not only can an array store primitives, but it can store any other kind of data that you can put in an object. So we're just going to create a little demonstration class of that. And then y'all will have a little homework assignment based on the same concept. So what are the goals of this one? We're going to have a class that matches up people's names and ages. We always use test scores, but I don't want to use test scores because that would involve embedding an array inside an array. And so, then we're going to have an array. And let's just call this a person. So that's our class, and we're going to have an array of persons. We're going to create the person, and we're going to add it to the array. Then we're going to write a loop that prints it out. So I'm going to launch NetBeans. I already had it launched. You may want to pause the video and launch it. So I'm going to do a new project. Next. Finish. And I will repeat this, although I've probably said it before. If you have a data class, never put it into the class with your main method. Always make a new class for it.
You've only done that a few select times.
Yeah. So, on my class, I'm going to do a new Java class. It's going to be called Person. P-E-R-S-O-N. Going to delete the comment. Put my name, date, and what the class is. The person class tracks a person's name and age. Alright, that's simple enough that I'm going to bring it over here, cover up our specifications. So if we were going to do this right, we would use, getters and setters. And they're easy enough to add with NetBeans that I guess I will. So private int age, and then private string name. And here's where we use NetBeans to totally cheat. Don't cheat on your exam. You got to actually remember how to write your getters and setters if I ask you. Although I guess you could load up NetBeans and do it. Refactor, encapsulate fields. Make sure everything's checked and click refactor, and then boom, it's added all of our getters and setters.
What is the at thing really supposed to do? I mean, I've seen it used.
Yeah, if you see these at signs here, these are what are known as Java docs. And the way Java docs work is that if I come over here and well, one thing is that I can generate an HTML document that is a document that explains every class in my project and all of these show up in it. So I know what the age is. So I know what the name is. So what I should be able to do is Tools, yeah, analyze Java doc. It's yelling at me that I don't have Java doc for the person class. So I'm going to fix this, the selected. Now I can come up here. I deleted that thing and now it's back. So I could add this information down here to the Java doc, to the person class. Now, if I come here down here, and I went to my main method in my other one, and I do person P1, and then I do P1 dot set age. Notice what it's doing there. It says age, the age to set.
Huh. Okay.
So I could put any description that I wanted to in that Java doc. And then the helper, the IntelliSense, whatever Microsoft calls it, I'm sure since this isn't a Microsoft product, they have a different name for it. The helper window tells you what that parameter means. So Java docs are actually pretty useful. The bad thing about Java docs is they make your class harder to look at. It's got all these @ signs and stuff like that. But I'm going to leave it just because. But I am going to move my string and my name back up to the top because I like seeing my variables up at the top of the class, not the bottom. So I just went to the top and I copied and I pasted them. Along with getters and setters, I always recommend providing what? Yeah, a constructor if it makes the class easier to use, dot equals if it makes it easier to use, and then a toString if it makes it easier to use. Profs, class guidelines. Constructor, dot equals, and toString. Am I going to ignore dot equals this time? Yeah. So a constructor is a method that has the same name as the class itself and can accept parameters. It needs to be public unless you don't want other people creating your object. So public person, it has no return type, and it's going to accept their age. It's going to accept their name. And you're going to get a funny little warning about NetBeans offering to make the class final after you do this, perhaps. And we'll talk about what that means. So this dot age is equal to age. This dot name is equal to name. Oh, because I made name an int rather than a string. I correct that. All right, I'm not seeing the warning now. Sometimes you'll see it say that this class could have been made a final. Perhaps that's if you don't have the set ages. NetBeans is being really a little bit too clever by half there. But if you wanted to make it so that once you created an object, it never changed, you could do that. You could put the word final up here. What final means is that once you've created a person, you shouldn't be able to change its values. That it is the final version of that object that you have created. Now to me it's kind of interesting that our setters aren't flagged as warnings, because why would you be able to set? So I'm going to build a project, see if those errors pop up. And yeah, I have errors now. Or I don't. Not a statement. What's not a statement? Oh. Okay. I added something to main that wasn't legit. Alright, so it actually did work. So why don't we go back to our person class and highlight final and hit the show Java doc on what final means. It doesn't tell us. Why didn't it tell us? How rude. Looking it up, the final keyword is used in several different contexts to define an entity that can only be assigned once. Once a final variable has been assigned, it always contains the same value. If a final variable holds a reference to the object, then it can't be changed. Okay, what if we made these ints and strings final? Now I'm getting my errors, right? Now it's not complaining about my setters. So this is saying that once I created a person, I would no longer be able to set its age and its name. So I thought that that would make the entire object final. It did not. I'm not going to take the time to research how you would do that in one fell swoop, or if you can. So why do you do that? Well, I don't know. Can't think of a good reason. Kind of defines it as a constant. We know what the word final means. We've used it in other contexts. We use it to mean constant. I really wanted it to work there to define the entire object as constant, but it didn't. So going onward and upward. So we have our person class. We've added a constructor for it. Let's add a toString method for it. Public string toString. Doesn't take any arguments. Builds a string.
Oh, that's what I was doing wrong. I kept thinking toString. Alright, second.
I'm going to make the string using string.format. So string s is equal to string.format. It's going to have the word person. Then it's going to have parentheses. Age equals %d. Name is equal to %s. End parentheses. That probably makes it harder to read. Comma, this dot age, comma, this dot name. And then return that string.
I really don't like that. For some things, I don't like how it auto-completes it for you, just because it doesn't let you override, it doesn't let you like over-type it. Like for when I did string.format, it did like the
It filled in args and stuff like,
Yeah.
yeah, string.format can be, the autocomplete can be annoying. And so usually you just click off of the string, and I just do it by habit so fast you don't see what I'm doing. I click off of the what it just auto-completed, and then like this.
Actually, I want to see it now.
String, don't type this, guys, equals string.format. Oh, now it's not even doing it. How cute.
It seems like it only does it when...
String dot for, okay. So if I actually hit one of these choices, it sure enough would fill it in. And I'm fond of hitting enter if I'm filling in a variable name. I'm not so fond of hitting enter if I'm filling in a method name, because I don't want it to fill in all those things. But it's sometimes useful. Okay, so we have a toString method. Let's test it out. Oh, I still have those declared as final. You know what? This is curious enough to me, using this, that I'm going to remove set age. I'm just going to comment it out. And I'm going to remove set name. I'm going to comment it out. And now we really do have an object where you can only define its values once. Now, would you really do that? Probably not. I can think of a reason to make something final, though, actually. And the reason would be you create an array, and it's got all sorts of information in it. It's got people's names, and it's got people's ages. And then you want to create another array that's got the same information. And if you didn't write a .clone method of some kind, then both of those are referring to the same objects. And then if something later on goes and changes those objects in one array, they're automatically changed for the other array. They're both pointing to the same thing. This would forbid that. You would not be able to change that object. The better solution is to give yourself a .clones method, so that if you copy the array from one into the other, then the objects were not the same. But we're not going to do that. Okay, so I'm going to go back to main now, create a person just to make sure it works. Person P1. P1 dot set age. Well, that doesn't work. I need to use a constructor. P1 is equal to new person, parentheses, and it's not filling in my my arguments there. Kind of disappointed about that. The autocomplete's not doing it, but whatever. This person's 30, and her name is Chuck. Now let's print them out. System.out.println. This is just to test it.
Oh, and I do have a question. So like the toString method that belongs to like the arrays class, you pass in your array as an argument. However, when we make our toString method, we don't pass it.
Right.
So how's it
That's-
actually overriding the toString method if, or
That's a very good question. Sometimes toString seems to take an argument, and sometimes it does not. The example is arrays.toString takes a reference to an array in order to print it out. The reason it has to do that is because an array, I think the array class itself ought to have a toString method that prints itself out pretty, but it doesn't. So they've created a helper class, but the helper class is all static functions. It's all class functions, not instance functions. So it has no data in order to print out, so we have to specify it.
okay.
So if you make a helper class that's going to have a toString method in it, you're going to have to pass in the original object in order to do something with it.
Right.
All right, so we have proven that it works. Hammer and broom, green arrow. It printed out our person who has an age of 30 and a name of Chuck. I'm going to delete those two things because instead I want to create an array of those things. We're going to need a scanner if we're going to allow the user to type this stuff in. Yeah, I think we need a scanner because although we can use random number generators for numbers, not so much for names. So I don't even need that person P1. I do need a scanner. Scanner SC is equal to new scanner system.in. I have to go and add the import for it. Go up to the package statement, import. Yeah, and yes, in real life I let NetBeans do this for me. Import Java lowercase j dot util lowercase u scanner capital S.
Oh, and I did have a quick question about arrays. Whenever you want to declare, or not declare, I don't know what word I want to use here. Okay, declare an array, but without giving it like a size or anything, but you want to, like I guess you want to split the declaration and the initialization into two different things. Can you do that for an array?
Right. Can you split the declaration of the array and its allocation into two things? Yes, you can, and the reason you want to be able to do that is so that you could do something like this, but then later on, if you needed to resize it, you could, that was supposed to be new int array, and don't type this, guys, these lines are going to go away. Just make a brand new one later on, like if you needed it to be 20 rather than 10. Now warning, that creates a brand new array, it blasts any of the old data,
Oh, okay.
but it's a new reference to it. So do you even need to do this? You could just do that. And then later on, reassign it.
Because like I try to keep all my variables at the top, every variable that I need, I try to put in like a declared variables comment block.
And then later on you start,
Yeah.
yeah. So you could do that. If you want to initialize it appropriately, just do that. That way it is a valid array. It's not pointing to null, and it won't give you an error if you pass it to arrays.print or anything like that, but it's an array of size 0. And so if you have a for loop, it won't iterate through it.
Okay.
Because if I did it like this and then I tried to use a for loop to go through it, it wouldn't even work. It'd say it was an end reference variable. But it's okay to create an array of size 0 and then to split it up like that. Now for simplicity's sake, when I'm typing code in here, I usually do it all in one fell swoop. How many people do we want in our array? Well, we could ask the user how big our array needs to be. So system.out.print how many people. And then we'd want to read that in. So I'm going to create a variable up here called max underscore people, max persons, max. All right. I'm going to initialize it to 0, but then we're immediately going to change it with SC. So max underscore persons is equal to sc.next int. If I want to let the user enter both first and last names, I'm going to need to switch over to using dot next line rather than just dot next. So I'm going to do that anyways, just right now. I'm going to create a temporary string, and then every time I call dot next, I'm not going to call next int, next double, next long. I'm just going to use, I'm going to read it into my temporary variable, sc.next, next line. And there are other ways you can handle this. You can, but I think we've already talked about if you mix next line and other ones, it starts malfunctioning. There are ways to fix it, but the easiest way in my mind is just to just use next line throughout the program if you're going to use it. Why do I want to use it? So I can let them type in both a first name and a last name in one fell swoop. If you want to ask them separately, that's great. But what if their name is Richard Q. Johnson III? You know, that's got 4 elements. You don't want to have to guess in advance whether you're going to be calling dot next 1, 2, 3, or 4 times. Cher's only got 1 name, right? So there's our variables. We have our scanner, we have our string, we have our max persons. We haven't allocated our array yet, but I'd like for my array to be declared. So this is an array of type person. Person array, yeah, people, is equal, nope, I'm just going to create an empty array right there. But I'm going to have to allocate it as soon as I ask them for the size. So max underscore persons is equal to integer dot next int. And yes, this could blow up, but it could, it's integer dot parse. I'm sorry, integer dot parse int, like that. And now I'm going to, and I'll go back to your question. Now I'm going to allocate my people array. People is equal to a new array of person of size max persons. And you had a question.
Why did we, I did max, I just got how many people and stored it in max persons. Is that okay?
But you call dot next, right?
Next int,
Or next
yes.
int, right. So what I'm doing is I'm using next line throughout the entire application just because I know that I'm going to use it to get their name. And if you mix next line and next int and things like that, then you have a high potential that it's not going to work.
Oh yeah, I forgot you did say that. What was the workaround to doing that though? I thought there was like...
There is a workaround for fixing that. You just have to clear the input buffer. We should find that. SC dot, not close. All right, let's Google it up. How to clear, no, how to clear scanner buffer in Java. How do I clear the scanner buffer? I tried the following, but it does not work. While it has next, dot next. You can't clear the buffer. Oh, come on, there's a way.
Someone told me like next line works, but wouldn't that have you hit enter twice, I'm assuming?
You could do this. While sc dot has a next, sc dot next line. That should read them all according to that. I know there's a better way of doing it though, so I'll find it. For now, let's just say that if we're going to use dot next line in one place, we're going to use it everywhere in the program. Okay, so we have allocated our array now. Let's use a for loop to let them enter it all in, or a while loop, whatever. For int I is equal to 0, I could just do max persons, or I could ask the array for its size, which is what I'm going to do. People dot length I++. I'm going to ask them for the name, ask them for the age, and then I'm going to create an object of that type, and then I'm going to add it to the array. So int age, string name, system.out.println person name, question mark, and read that in. Name is equal to sc.next line. No, that's not going to work. Yeah, that one actually works. I don't have to read it into a temporary variable because it already is a string. And then system.out.println person age. Name is equal to, nope, s is equal to sc.next line, and then parse it. Age is equal to integer dot parse int the string. What would be kind of neat is if this was in its own function, and if we use exception handling or we use something else to make sure that they actually typed an integer. Because you know what happens if you type in a string with non-digits, but then you call parse int or next int or something like that, it blows up. So we should add exception handling, but we're not going to because that's not the real point of this exercise. Now we have all of our data. Let's create a person. Person p new is equal to new person of that age and that name. And let's add it to the array. People at index I is equal to that new person. So if we wanted to add comments, we would say get the info for the person, and then create the person, and then add the person to the array. So why would you create an object rather than just use a parallel array? Right? We could create a parallel array of ages and names. That's sort of a rhetorical question, but I'm curious if y'all have an idea on that. And if you don't, that's okay.
Say the question one more time.
Why actually create an array of objects rather than parallel arrays? We could create an array of age, of ints, in an array of string called name, and we could keep all this data just fine in two arrays rather than an array of objects.
Well, I feel like it'd be better to have it, I guess, because in this way it's like encapsulated together. Like, I guess since they're two separate arrays, somehow that data could probably get messed up, but since we put it in a class by itself, and
Yeah. So the reason would be that I would think, pretty similar to what you said, is that if you encapsulate all that data into one object, you can change that object without changing the rest of your code, pretty much. Like what happened if we make a function, a procedure, that accepts two arrays. And then, oh, we've decided that we don't only care about their age and their name, but that we need to know their, their birth date or whatever, or their address. Okay, then you have to go and modify all your functions to accept three arrays rather than two. And then you decide you want to add another attribute, and their favorite dog. Then I guess we're collecting information to be a password hacker. We need to know their first pet and their street where they were born. And okay, I'm kidding. But anyways, so you would have to keep modifying all your code in order to accept first two arrays and then three arrays and four arrays. Whereas if we encapsulate it all into a single object, we can probably just change it in one place and then make minimal changes to the rest of our code. All right, I guess let's print it out.
oh, can you go up to about line 25? Okay. So the only reason is telling me that my assignment's never used. However, I use. Oh, that's it.
Yeah, I do have some warnings about unused assignments. And it's where I made string s and I gave it a default value. I could get rid of that. and where I made the array point to an empty array, and where I said max.
Oh, okay.
So it's just awfully picky. NetBeans is a little too picky in that case, I think. But I guess it's useful information. If you're expecting, if it looks like really valid data, like I had max persons equal to 100, and then that warning would tell me, oh, by the way, we never use that, then you'd wonder why you declared it 100. You'd have to rethink your purpose in life. I mean, rethink how you wrote the code.
Okay, good.
So let's write a for loop that'll print out our people. System.out.print. Nope. We've tried this already, right? Let's do system.out.println just to see how arrays.toString would handle it. Arrays
Oh, I remember this.
.toString our people array. And this is where testing gets annoying because we have to type in information each time. So I'm going to create an array that only has 2 people. How many people? 2. Person's name, Joe Bob. Their age, they're 100. They're 31. Person's name, Evan. Their age, 40. And then it prints it out. And it actually kind of looks okay. At least it didn't print out just names. References. Memory addresses, and the reason for that is we did add a toString method to our person class. If we did not have a toString method, then it would print out a list of memory addresses. So that's one of the advantages that you get of adding a toString method, is that at least if you try to print some debug information, you can see the information that's in it. But that's not really going to handle it. That's not going to cut it for us. One thing I don't like about this is we can kind of get confused between the person's age and the person's name, right? Because it all looks very similar. Person name, person age. I think it ought to say Joe Bob's age. So I'm going to go and modify this to where it says person's age to say enter the age for Joe Bob, or person age for, and let's print out their name. Plus name plus a question mark. That's just a little nicety. I'm still not printing it out. I'm testing it again. How many people to? The person's name is Freddie K. And the person age for Freddie K. That's still kind of a dumb prompt, but at least it says for Freddie K. It'd be cooler if it just said Freddie K's age, right? We put an apostrophe S on it. That'd be better. And they're 100. I guess I'm going to make that change, just to be really picky. So, where I'm changing is person's age. It's going to now say name plus quote apostrophe S followed by the word age followed by a question mark, and that's all it needs to say. That'll be better. So that's the line that I just changed. And if you didn't change any of this, that's okay. All right, let's write a for loop that'll print it out rather than just depending on arrays.string. We could even use a for each loop because we're not changing the data. So let's do that. For every person in the people array, let's print that person out. System.out.println that person. Print out P. Testing it, then I'll bring the code back up. How many people? Joe Bob, who's 30, Anne Marie, who's 40. And then we have our data. Maybe we'd want numbers out beside it, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, in which case we'd want to make a counter, or we could use a for loop rather than a for each loop. When do you not want to use a for each loop, just in general?
When you have to modify.
Right, you don't use it if you have to modify the data, because this is a read-only copy of the data. No, I won't say it's read-only, but it's close enough to being conceptually read-only. If you make any changes to it, it doesn't change the original data. Is that true? I'm going to say P dot, no, I can't change it because I made these finals. All right, so anyways, we're saved from the mad professor trying to experiment with that.
So what's it, I can forget, what's it called when you pass a, is it pass by value, and then like, there's Java, like, I guess Java and C++, like, you know, C++ you have to use references and.
Right, we've got pass by copy value, and then we have pass by reference, and then we have pass by pointer. This is C++, this is C++ only. C++, C# support that, and they all support this. So the consequence of that is if you pass something in to a function, a procedure, a method, then any changes to it inside that method are not going to trickle your way back out. Now you can get kind of confused because if you pass in an object, then you can change the members of that object, but you can't create a new object and then set that reference equal to that new object.
Okay, so like, say if we have like an int called I, and I equals 2, and then we did add 2, and we passed into like a method called add 2, and then printed out I after, would I still be
Right.
its original value?
Yeah, so we're going to make a method to demonstrate that this is passed by copy rather than anything else. We're going to call it add2. We're going to accept a value I. I'm going to say I is equal to I plus 2. I'm going to declare this as void, and I'm going to declare it as static just so that it'll work. Why? Because we're going to be calling it from a static method, so it has to be static itself. And now I'm going to create a variable. I is equal to 3, but I'm going to call add2 and pass I in. Int I is equal to 3.
Do we have to return I in our function?
If you want to use the new value, yeah. But system.out.println I equals plus I, and it's still going to be equal to 3. Because although this changed the value of the I parameter just contains a copy of what we passed into it. It does not contain the original.
Okay.
What if you want to do something new? Can we just tack on return I, come over here and make this an int? No, that's wrong. Public static int. Is that going to change the value of I? It's still not going to. Application's already running. That's probably what the problem is. No, there definitely seems to be a problem elsewhere. Oh. I already have I declared somewhere else, so okay, add x, add 2 to x, print out x. Now it'll work. Rebuild, run. X is still equal to 3. Why? I returned I. Yeah, but we weren't storing it anywhere. If we did that, that's the only way to actually get that change to be permanent.
Okay. That makes sense. It's just, it's so weird because you're returning the new one, so whatever the value that you're returning is, it should, what should print.
Right.
But yeah, so you're storing, so you're storing it, oh, that's my phone, in X.
So if we did add 2 in the system out println, would it display that added 2, and then we could just display x again as 3?
Right. Like if we did this, add 2 to x there, it would actually print out 5 because
But it doesn't say
because
that
he
X is
returns a 5, and so when it's time to print it out, it's got a 5. X is still equal to, oh well, if I commented that out. Does
So
that
X
make
is still
sense?
equal to 3, but in our print, it would be equal to 5. But we didn't store that 5 anywhere, so
Right.
it would just
So
be
even if we went back down here and we did something else with X, X still equals
Three.
3.
until
but-
you copy that
Right.
into. Okay, sorry.
So the fact that we called this add to is really pretty misleading, and the fact that we wrote it like that, that's why I would do int retval is equal to I plus 2, and then return retval. That makes it clear for anybody reading this that we're not even trying to change the original value. Now, for C++ and C#, you can modify these things. You could pass in as a reference or as a pointer, and it would actually be able to change the I, but that would require a different syntax, and Java does not support that.
I didn't mean to get off topic. That was just in my head.
Yeah, I think we're done with this. I'd like for us to do an assignment based on this concept. So we're going to create a vet application where we have a class named animal, and each animal has a species, a name. Yeah, so example, border collie, mutt, things like that. And then a birth date, which should just be a string, and whether they are vaccinated or not. Rabies vaccinated, but vaccinated. We're not going to make it more complicated than that, right? Okay. So make sure you have a toString method to easily print this out if you want. Do a constructor if you want, but whatever, in the end, let the user specify the number of animals, create an array of that size of animals, let them enter information for each animal to add into the array,
And print.
and then a for loop to print it all out, and then a for loop to print it out.
That works for me.
Not a print if you want, a toString if you want. Oh, yeah.
I don't care if nobody else can. Onward to my Friday.
Does
All right.
someone start at 4?
Oh, I'm sorry. I kept you late.
These are keys, by the way.
I let them know that I was going to